My name is Emily Carter, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those who should protect you most, and how justice finds its way through the most unexpected channels. She had cared for the entire family like a shadow, invisible yet essential, until they cast her out to fund her sister's frivolous dreams. They thought I would disappear quietly into the night, another casualty of their calculated cruelty. But what Grandma left behind changed everything, turning their web of lies into their own trap. A secret will, hidden legal documents, and suddenly the family drama they'd carefully orchestrated was exposed for the fraud it truly was. They schemed and plotted, never realizing they were stepping on a landmine of their own making. The house would return to its rightful owner, and those who betrayed would pay the price they deserved. The morning I discovered my parents had sold our family home started like any other October day in Maple Hollow. The leaves were turning that brilliant gold that made our small Connecticut town look like something from a postcard. And I was rushing to get to Meadowbrook Elementary, where I taught third grade. At 29, I'd been living in the same house since birth, caring for Grandma Margaret in her final years while my parents traveled and my younger sister Chloe partied her way through her 20s. I should have seen the signs. The way Mom had been avoiding eye contact for weeks. How Dad suddenly started taking interest in the house's market value. The hushed phone conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. But I was too busy grading papers, planning lessons, and maintaining the home that had sheltered 3 generations of Carters to notice the betrayal brewing under my own roof. Emily, we need to talk. Dad's voice cut through my morning routine as I poured coffee into my travel mug. Thomas Carter stood in the kitchen doorway, his gray suit impeccable as always, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him, Mom hovered, wringing her hands in that nervous way she had when delivering bad news. Can it wait? I have bus duty this morning. I grabbed my lesson planner, already mentally preparing for the day ahead. 28 8-year-olds required every ounce of energy I possessed. No, it can't. His tone made me freeze. In all my years, I'd rarely heard him sound so final, so cold. Sit down. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. I lowered myself into Grandma's old chair, the one with the faded roses on the cushion, and waited. Mom finally spoke, her voice pitched high with false cheerfulness. Honey, you know how we've been worried about Chloe? Chloe? Of course. Everything always came back to my 25-year-old sister. The family's golden child who could do no wrong despite never holding a job for more than 3 months or contributing a dime to household expenses. What's wrong now? Did she max out another credit card? I couldn't keep the sarcasm from my voice. Last month, it had been a shopping spree in Manhattan. The month before, a spontaneous trip to Cabo with friends she couldn't afford. She's been offered an amazing opportunity in Silver Creek, Mom continued, ignoring my tone. A fresh start, a chance to really make something of herself. There's this gorgeous penthouse apartment, perfect for someone in her position. What position? Professional Instagram influencer? The words came out harsher than intended, but I was tired. Tired of watching them enable her, tired of being the responsible one, tired of pretending this was normal. Dad cleared his throat. We've made a decision. The house has been sold. You have 2 weeks to make other arrangements. The words hit me like physical blows. Sold. 2 weeks. Other arrangements. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline to this cruel joke, but their faces remained serious. You sold Grandma's house. My voice came out as a whisper. The house she lived in for 60 years, the house where I spent the last 3 years caring for her while you were too busy to visit. It's our house now, Dad said firmly. Mother left it to us in her will, and we have the right to do with it as we see fit. The buyers are paying cash, well above market value. The money will set Chloe up properly in the city. And what about me? The question hung in the air like smoke. Where am I supposed to go? Mom reached across the table, but I pulled back. You're so capable, Emily. You always land on your feet. And really, don't you think it's time you got your own place? You're almost 30. I pay half the bills here. I paid for the new roof last year. I've been maintaining this place while you. I stopped, choking on the unfairness of it all. While they traveled to wine country and Chloe flitted from party to party, I'd been here, replacing the water heater, fixing the porch steps, keeping Grandma's garden alive. Those were your choices, Dad said, standing up. No one forced you to stay. The papers are signed. The Bensons will take possession on November 1st. They left me sitting there, staring at the empty doorway. 2 weeks to dismantle a lifetime. 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live on a teacher's salary in a market where rent had skyrocketed. 2 weeks to accept that the people who were supposed to love me had chosen my sister's whims over my stability. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe twice in 7 years. The thought of facing those bright young faces while my world crumbled was unbearable. Instead, I wandered through the house like a ghost, touching familiar surfaces, memorizing the way morning light filtered through the dining room windows. This house held everything. The pencil marks on the doorframe tracking my height and Chloe's. The burn mark on the kitchen counter from when I'd tried to make Grandma breakfast at age 10. The creaky step forth from the top that I'd learned to avoid during her final months when sleep came so rarely. Every corner held a memory. And now strangers would paint over them all. I found myself in Grandma's room, unchanged since her death 6 months ago. Her perfume still lingered faintly. That mix of lavender and something uniquely her. The bed was made with her favorite quilt, the one she'd sewn herself with fabric from old dresses. I sat on the edge, feeling the weight of loss all over again. I tried, Grandma, I whispered to the empty room. I tried to keep it all together like you asked. My fingers traced the pattern on the quilt, and that's when I noticed it. The cedar chest at the foot of the bed, the one Grandma had brought from her mother's house, sat slightly askew. The lock, which had been firmly secured since her death, hung open. Curious, I lifted the heavy lid. Inside were the expected treasures: her wedding album, letters from Grandpa during the war, the pearl necklace she wore every Sunday. But beneath those, wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a faded ribbon, was a manila envelope with my name written across it in Grandma's distinctive script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated 3 years ago, just after her first stroke. My dearest Emily, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've finally found my little insurance policy. I know my son, your father. I raised him, after all, though I sometimes wonder where I went wrong. I also know that without me here to stop them, he and that wife of his will try to sell this house to fund whatever foolish scheme Chloe has cooked up. That's why I'm writing this letter and why I've taken the steps I have. I had to read the next part 3 times before it sank in. 3 years ago, while I'd been focused on Grandma's recovery, she'd been busy with something else entirely. She'd legally transferred ownership of the house to me. The documents were all there: the deed transfer, properly notarized and filed with the county. Tax records showing I'd been listed as the owner for 3 years. Even a copy of the letter she'd had delivered to my parents, informing them of the change, with their signatures acknowledging receipt. They knew. They had known for 3 years that the house was mine, and they'd tried to sell it anyway. The rage that flooded through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't hot and explosive, but cold and calculating. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd attempted to commit fraud. They'd taken money from the Bensons for a house they didn't own. They'd signed contracts they had no right to sign. I spent the rest of the day making copies of everything, photographing each document with my phone, scanning them into my laptop. Then I called Hannah Walsh, my best friend since high school, who'd become a real estate attorney. We'd lost touch somewhat over the years, but she picked up on the second ring. Oh my God, it's been forever, how are you? I need your help, I said, and then I told her everything. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then Hannah let out a low whistle. Holy shit, Emily, they really tried to sell your house. Can they do that, legally? Absolutely not. If what you're telling me is accurate and these documents are legitimate, then they've committed fraud. The sale to the Bensons is void. The house is yours. Has been yours for 3 years. Your parents could face serious legal consequences. I need to verify everything is legitimate first, I said, already feeling the plan forming in my mind. Can you help? I'll clear my schedule. Can you meet me at the county records office tomorrow morning? That night, I sat through dinner like nothing had changed. Mom chattered about the moving company they'd hired, how generous it was of them to pay for my relocation expenses up to $500. Though really, with all the money from the sale, I suppose we could spare a bit more if you need it, she added, as if this made up for throwing me out. Chloe had joined us, glowing with excitement about her new life. The penthouse has a view of the river, she gushed. And there's a gym in the building, and a doorman. Can you imagine me with a doorman? I smiled and nodded, cutting my chicken into precise pieces. That sounds wonderful, Chloe. When do you move? As soon as the sale closes, maybe sooner. Daddy says the Bensons are eager to get in before Thanksgiving. She paused, fixing me with those big blue eyes that had gotten her out of trouble our entire lives. You're not mad, are you? I mean, you understand, right? This is my chance to really make something of myself. Of course, I said, my voice steady. Everyone deserves a chance to make something of themselves. Dad nodded approvingly at my response. That's very mature of you, Emily. I knew you'd understand. Family supports. Family. I almost laughed at the irony, but managed to turn it into a cough. Family supports. Family. Is that what they'd told themselves when they'd signed papers to sell my inheritance? When they'd chosen Chloe's pipe dreams over my reality? The next morning, I met Hannah at the county records office. She'd dressed in her full lawyer ensemble sharp suit, briefcase, an expression that meant business. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Dolores, pulled up the records without question. Oh yes, she said, adjusting her reading glasses. I remember this transfer. Your grandmother was quite specific about the process. She came in herself, even though she was using that walker. Insisted on seeing everything filed properly. Hannah examined each document with professional thoroughness. Everything's in order. The transfer is completely legal. You've been the owner of record for 3 years. You've been paying the property taxes. I nodded. I took over all the bills when Grandma got sick. I just kept paying them after she died. Smart. That further establishes your ownership. She pulled out her phone, did some quick calculations. The Bensons gave your parents a deposit. I heard Dad mention $50,000. Hannah's eyes widened. They're in deep trouble. Taking money for a property they don't own. That's wire fraud if the money was transferred electronically. Your parents could be looking at serious jail time. The words should have scared me, but they didn't. They'd made their choice. Now they would face the consequences. What do I do now? First, we put a stop to this sale. I'll draft a cease and desist letter to your parents' real estate agent. Then we'll contact the Bensons' attorney directly. They need to know they've been victims of fraud. After that, she smiled grimly. We wait for the explosion. The explosion came 3 days later. I was at school, teaching my students about the water cycle, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. 23 missed calls from Mom, 15 from Dad, 47 texts from Chloe. I turned it off and continued teaching. The water cycle waited for no family drama. After school, I drove home to find chaos. Cars filled the driveway, my parents' Lexus, a Mercedes I didn't recognize, and Chloe's beat-up Honda that she'd somehow never traded in despite her champagne tastes. Raised voices carried from inside the house, my house audible, even from the street. I parked carefully and walked in through the front door like I had thousands of times before. The living room was packed. Mom was crying on the sofa. Dad paced by the fireplace, his face an alarming shade of red. Chloe stood by the window, mascara streaking down her cheeks. 2 people I didn't recognize, the Bensons. I assumed sat stiffly in Grandma's wing chairs, while a man in an expensive suit spoke in low, measured tones. Fraud of this magnitude cannot be ignored. My clients put down $50,000 in good faith. Everyone turned as I entered. The silence was deafening. Emily, Mom jumped up, rushing toward me. Thank God you're here. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Tell them we didn't know about the transfer. Tell them. I set down my teacher's tote, removed my jacket, and hung it in the closet. Normal actions for a normal day. Except nothing about this was normal. Hello, I said to the room at large. I'm Emily Carter. I own this house. The Benson's lawyer, the man in the expensive suit, stood. Ms. Dari Carter, I'm David Hutchinson, representing Robert and Linda Benson. We need to discuss the situation regarding the fraudulent sale of this property. There's no fraud. Dad exploded. My mother was ill. She wasn't in her right mind when she made that transfer. We're contesting it. 3 years after the fact, I asked calmly. 3 years after you signed acknowledgement of receipt of the notification, that's going to be a hard sell. Dad. His face went from red to purple. You're behind this. You manipulated her when she was vulnerable. I was 26 years old, teaching full-time, and caring for her after her stroke. When exactly did I have time to manipulate anyone? I turned to the Bensons, genuinely sympathetic to their situation. I'm sorry you were caught up in this. You seem like nice people who just wanted to buy a house. Unfortunately, my parents didn't own this house to sell it to you. This is ridiculous, Chloe shrieked, finally finding her voice. That house in Silver Creek, I already put down a deposit. I told everyone I was moving. This ruins everything. Maybe you should have verified your funding source before making commitments. I suggested. She flew at me then, or tried to. Dad caught her arm, holding her back, but the damage was done. The Bensons exchanged glances, and Mrs. Benson spoke for the first time. We want our money back, all of it, plus damages for the time we've wasted, the apartment we gave up, the moving company we hired. She looked at my parents with disgust. We trusted you. Mr. Hutchinson cleared his throat. My clients are prepared to pursue both civil and criminal charges unless full restitution is made immediately. Criminal charges. Mom's voice came out as a squeak. Fraud. Wire fraud if the money was transferred electronically. Breach of contract. Attempted grand larceny. He ticked them off on his fingers. The district attorney will be very interested in this case. Dad sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. We don't have $50,000 in liquid assets. It's already been allocated to Chloe's apartment. Then you'd better liquidate something. Mr. Hutchinson said coldly, You have 48 hours to return my client's money, or we proceed with filing charges. The meeting broke up after that. The Bensons left with their lawyer, barely glancing at the house they'd thought would be theirs. I stood in my living room, watching my family fall apart. How could you? Mom whispered, tears still streaming. We're your parents. How could you do this to us? How could I? You tried to sell my house. You committed fraud. You took money that wasn't yours to take. And you want to know how I could stop you. It was supposed to be ours, Dad roared, finding his voice again. I'm her son. The house should have gone to me. But it didn't. I said simply. Grandma made her choice. She chose the granddaughter who stayed, who cared, who didn't see her as a bank account or an asset to liquidate. She chose me. You've ruined everything, Chloe wailed. My whole future, gone. How am I supposed to start over now? Maybe by getting a job, I suggested. Novel concept. I know. She lunged again. And this time, no one stopped her. Her palm connected with my cheek in a sharp slap that echoed through the room. I touched my face, feeling the heat bloom across my skin, and smiled. Feel better, good. Now get out of my house. All of you. You can't throw us out, Mom protested. We live here. No, you live here at my discretion, and I'm exercising my right as the property owner to revoke that permission. You have 1 hour to pack what you can carry. You can arrange to get the rest of your belongings later, with supervision. Emily, please, Mom begged. Where will we go? That's not my problem. Maybe Chloe's friends in the city have a couch you can crash on. Or maybe you can use some of that money you were so eager to spend on her penthouse to get a hotel room. I walked to the front door and opened it. 1 hour. They didn't move at first, frozen by the impossibility of it all. Then Dad stood, straightening his shoulders. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "When you're alone in this house with no family, no support, you'll regret this." "I've been alone in this house for years," I replied. "The only difference is now I won't be paying for the privilege." The next hour was a blur of slamming doors and muffled curses. They packed what they could, thrown off balance by the sudden reversal of fortune. Mom tried once more to appeal to my emotions, reminding me of all they'd done for me over the years. The math didn't add up in their favor, and we both knew it. Chloe was the last to leave, dragging a designer suitcase that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She stopped in the doorway, her face blotchy and swollen from crying. "I'll never forgive you for this," she hissed. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I said. "I'm asking for what's mine." When they were gone, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I felt I'd been holding for years. The house settled around me, creaking in that familiar way that sounded like welcome. I was alone. Yes. But for the first time in my life, I was alone on my own terms. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal procedures and small-town gossip. The Bensons got their money back, though it required my parents to drain their retirement accounts and sell Dad's beloved boat. They found a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town, the kind of place they'd always looked down on. Chloe's dreams of city living evaporated like morning mist. Word spread through Maple Hollow like wildfire. In a town of 8,000 people, a scandal like this was front-page news. People I'd known my whole life stopped me in the grocery store to share their opinions. Some thought I was heartless, throwing out my own parents. Others, particularly those who'd known Grandma well, understood perfectly. "Margaret always said you were the only one with sense," Mrs. Patterson told me at the post office. "She'd be proud of you for standing up for yourself." I hoped that was true. Late at night, sitting in Grandma's chair with her quilt wrapped around my shoulders, I talked to her like she was still there. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked the empty room. The house always seemed to answer with its settling sounds, a language I'd learned to interpret over the years. This time, it sounded like approval. My parents tried several tactics over the following months. First came the guilt trips, messages about how hard life was in their tiny apartment, how Dad's health was suffering from the stress. When that didn't work, they switched to anger, threatening to contest the transfer in court. Hannah shut that down with a single letter outlining the criminal charges they'd narrowly avoided and reminding them that statute of limitations was far from expired. Then came the flying monkeys relatives who'd never bothered to visit Grandma when she was sick, but now had strong opinions about family loyalty. Aunt Susan called to lecture me about forgiveness. Uncle Pete sent a long email about how disappointed Grandma would be. I deleted them all unread after the first few lines. Chloe took a different approach. She started a GoFundMe, claiming she was the victim of elder abuse and family manipulation. She raised $37, mostly from people who hadn't read past the headline. When that failed, she tried social media, posting tearful videos about being homeless because of her cruel sister. The comments weren't kind. Turns out, people who actually knew our family history weren't buying her victim narrative. The seasons changed. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Maple Hollow in pristine snow. I spent my evenings by the fireplace, grading papers and planning lessons in the peaceful quiet of my own home. No more walking on eggshells. No more subsidizing Chloe's lifestyle. No more pretending we were a functional family. On Christmas Eve, I found an envelope under the door. No return address, but I recognized Mom's handwriting. Inside was a single photo our family at Grandma's last Christmas. All of us smiling around the dinner table. On the back, she'd written, "I'm sorry. I studied the photo for a long time. We looked happy, but photos lie. They capture a split second, not the reality of daily life. In that moment, maybe we were happy, or maybe we were just good at pretending." I placed the photo in Grandma's album, alongside all the other captured moments, history, but not destiny. That night, I hosted my own Christmas Eve dinner. Hannah came with her husband and their new baby. My teacher friends brought desserts and wine. We filled the house with laughter and warmth, creating new memories in rooms that had seen too much drama. You know, Hannah said, bouncing her daughter on her knee. This place feels different now, lighter somehow. She was right. Without the weight of resentment and enabling, the house had returned to what it was meant to be, a home. My home. The new year brought unexpected developments. Dad had a mild heart attack, stress-related, the doctors said. I sent a card but didn't visit. Some bridges, once burned, weren't meant to be rebuilt. Mom got a job at a department store, her first in 20 years. The gossip mill reported she was good at it, channeling her shopping expertise into sales. Chloe surprised everyone by actually getting a job too, waitressing at the diner on Route 9. The same diner where she'd often complained about the sad people with their sad lives. Humility, it seemed, was a harsh but effective teacher. I ran into her one morning in early spring. I'd stopped for coffee before school. And there she was in a polyester uniform, refilling cups and forcing smiles. Our eyes met across the crowded diner. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked over, coffee pot in hand. The usual, she asked, as if we were strangers. Just coffee, black. She poured carefully, not meeting my eyes. I heard you redecorated Grandma's room. I turned it into a library. She always loved books. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. She used to read to us there, remember? I remember. She started to say something else, then shook her head. Enjoy your coffee. That was our relationship now. Polite strangers with a shared history we couldn't discuss. It was better than anger, I supposed, but sadder somehow. Spring turned to summer, and with it came an unexpected letter from a law firm in Hartford. Grandma, it seemed, had one more surprise. She'd had a life insurance policy I knew nothing about, one she'd maintained for decades. The beneficiary, me, of course. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to finally fix the foundation issues the house had developed, replace the aging furnace, and still have money left over. I used some of it to create a scholarship at the elementary school in Grandma's name, for students who showed kindness to others. She would have loved that, Mrs. Patterson said when I announced it at the town meeting. Margaret always said kindness mattered more than cleverness. The Bensons found another house, a newer one on the other side of town. I saw them occasionally at the farmers' market or the 4th of July parade. They always nodded politely, no hard feelings. They'd been victims too, after all. As summer waned, I stood in Grandma's garden, my garden now watching the tomatoes ripen and the sunflowers reach for the sky. The house stood behind me, solid and sure, no longer a battleground, but a sanctuary. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Emily, it's Mom. I know you probably won't respond, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. What we did was wrong. What we tried to do was worse. Your grandmother saw something we missed, that love isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up. You showed up. We didn't. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for everything. Maybe someday you'll be ready to talk. If not, I understand that too. Despite everything, I'm proud of the woman you've become. The woman you've always been. If I'd bothered to really look. I read it twice, then put my phone away. Maybe someday I'd be ready to respond. Maybe not. Forgiveness. I'd learned wasn't a requirement for moving forward. Sometimes the best thing you could do was accept the apology and continue on your path. The sun set over Maple Hollow, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in town, my family was learning to live with the consequences of their choices. Here in the house that Grandma built, not with boards and nails, but with love and foresight, I was finally home. I thought about her often, especially in quiet moments like this. How she'd known what would happen, how she'd protected me even after death. The transfer hadn't been about the house, not really. It had been about ensuring that the child who'd loved her for herself, not her assets, would be secure. Thank you, I whispered to the evening air, knowing somehow she heard me. Inside, Papers waited to be graded and lessons planned. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate. But tonight, in my house, surrounded by memories both bitter and sweet, I was exactly where I belonged. The house settled around me as darkness fell. Its familiar creaks and sighs a lullaby I'd heard all my life. But now I heard it differently. Now I heard what Grandma must have heard, not just a house, but a legacy. Not just walls and floors, but a foundation for a different kind of life. I'd lost a family, but gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I could stand alone, that I deserved to be chosen, that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply claiming what was always rightfully yours and building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. In the morning, I'd wake up in my house, make coffee in my kitchen, and go teach children about kindness and consequences in equal measure. But tonight, I sat on the porch Grandpa had built, wrapped in Grandma's quilt, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The kind that comes not from forgiveness or forgetting, but from finally understanding that some people will never see your worth and that's their loss, not yours. The kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even when it hurt, even when it cost you everything you thought you needed. Somewhere in Maple Hollow, my parents were learning to live without the safety net they'd always taken for granted. Chloe was discovering that dreams require work, not just wishes. And I was here, in the house that love built, finally free to be more than the family servant, the forgotten daughter, the one who always gave and never received. The stars came out, one by one, like promises kept. I named them as Grandma had taught me, finding Orion and Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper and the North Star, constants in a changing world, just like the love she'd left behind in legal documents and careful planning. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. There might be more attempts at reconciliation, more guilt trips, more small-town gossip to navigate. But tonight, I was Emily Carter, homeowner, teacher, survivor. The granddaughter who stayed, who cared, who inherited not just a house, but the knowledge that she was worth choosing. And that, more than any revenge, was Grandma's greatest gift.